Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So today we're going to continue the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and what I'm doing today is a follow-up video to one I did a very long time ago talking about screen filters, why they matter, where you should use them, and how to use them, because a lot of things have changed since the last time I did that video. So we're going to jump in, talk about what these filters are, what they're trying to accomplish, how they work, and whether or not you should use them. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But I have two schools of thought on screen filters. I definitely use them, but I feel like they are more fundamentally important for 2D games and 3D games. Your feelings may be different, and we will definitely go over why I think that in just a moment. As we look around the work in progress Nintendo 64 core here, if we pop into load presets on the different video filters, we can throw whatever we want on. Medium scanlines, you can throw them over the top. Now I think this looks a little bit too heavy-handed and it makes it a little bit too dark, but the great thing about the filters is pretty much every single filter can be articulated, and if you don't like one, just go into load presets and load something else up. The soft scan lines look relatively good on Super Mario 64. Don't forget this is coming through with YouTube compression, so the detail I see will be slightly diminished, and we'll get back to Mario in a bit. But let's move over to Super Mario World on Super Nintendo. There are application-specific core filters. What that means is filters has been designed for certain cores within MiSTer FPGA that should make it look like you are playing original hardware. Because obviously while this looks spectacular, this is better than any sort of signal you're probably ever going to see out of the back of your Super Nintendo, whether it's RGB or not. And that is totally fine. Generally I play like this, but I know a lot of people like filters, so let's pop back into video processing and go into one of the filter presets. You'll see here under load preset, you're going to see a core specific directory. You're going to also have a couple other different options that you can play around with, which we'll go over in a bit. But under core specific, we have interpolation for SNES, and we also have another one. Now you're going to see that the image is nowhere near as sharp in motion, and all of those pixels are kind of blended together, a lot like you would see on a consumer CRT television back when the Super Nintendo was new, because I'm sure 99 of 100 people watching this video probably hooked up their Super Nintendo with the yellow composite cable, and maybe some of you were still on RF. If we go back into load preset, we can do SNES scanlines, and this is going to try to emulate the scanlines and the look of a Super Nintendo when it was on a CRT television. Because if you didn't grow up in the days of CRT tube TVs, they had raster lines, and that created these scanline images across your monitor. You do not get that on LCD television, so everyone's trying to recreate that, and a lot of these presets here do a pretty good job of it. But you can do pretty much anything you want with the filters, and that is the fun in this. You can do absolutely whatever you want, and if it looks good to you, then that is the correct filter that you should be using. You can definitely make things look a little bit weird if you just throw the wrong filter on top of it, but that is where the fun lies in here. You'll have all of these different presets. You can do a Sony PVM, you can do a Sony consumer television, you can do a VGA monitor, which would have more of an aperture grill look to it, but we'll get that in a bit. But as we move over to Game Boy, this is one of those systems in which the filtration, I think 100% changes the entire core look and feel, and it definitely should be turned on. Because the screen on an original Game Boy definitely had a certain look to it, and that is not achieved with the core bone stock. You'll see here on the left that is with no filters on, and on the right we do have that Game Boy specific filter. Not only does it slightly brighten up the image, you can tell in those whites, but it puts that grid over top the image, which is how you remember Game Boy games playing. And don't forget, a lot of the artists back in the day when they were creating the graphics for these games kept the screen in mind. If you're making a Game Boy game, you may draw your art specifically to that screen so that you know it's going to look good on there, and that's why it is so nice to have these core specific filters. As we move back over into the game itself, you may see that little bit of a grid line over the top. Again, if you're on your phone, you may have to zoom in a bit. This video is definitely going to be much better watched on a full-size television. But this is how the game would look on a real Game Boy screen, except much clearer. And you'll see here all of those lines, all of that grid pattern are going to disappear in the blacks. The filter does a great job of only showing you that pattern where it should be, and it basically gets washed away in the darks right there. So you're seeing the detail of the filters where they should be, and they're falling off in the dark area. And if you don't like this, you can just basically go back in, turn on any other filter. If you just go back to no filters, that will turn them all off. You'll see here the green did get a little bit brighter, but I do think it looks slightly washed out without that filter. But the great part is there's so many different options in here, and these are just the ones that are going to come down with Update All, the basic MiSTer filters. You can create your own, you can get them from different places. This is just what's going to come down with the actual MiSTer updater. And you'll see here, if you throw a filter that doesn't belong on top, it still looks really good. We're basically just creating a vibe here, and that's why I say when I talk about video filters, it doesn't matter which one you pick. If it looks good and you're enjoying it, then that is a totally acceptable thing to do. But if you want to go back to video processing, you can switch back that quickly. That is the great thing. And on the core specific here right now, Game Boy just looks like it should. Let's move over to one of my favorite consoles of all time, the Neo Geo. We're playing King of Fighters 99 here today. This is a native image, there's no filter on it whatsoever, and I think this looks absolutely spectacular. There really doesn't need to be anything done to this image, but that's why filters are so fun. They aren't exactly essential. Sure, I do think that they should be on top on the Game Boy games, but something like Neo Geo here, this clean HDMI out looks absolutely spectacular. But we can play around and see if we can make it look better, about the same, or worse, because do be aware, you can, in my opinion, make things look worse if you pick the wrong filter. We'll just kind of play around here and let's see what VGA looks like. We'll go up to Trinitron, you're going to see it gets a little bit blurry. That's the thing, I don't like when it starts taking details out of Neo Geo. So I'll go ahead and put some medium scan lines on and see how that looks in motion. That's the great thing about these filters, they apply instantaneously over the top in the video processing pipeline, and you can just kind of check them out on a per game basis. Now I will say that these medium scan lines for me are too heavy. They're coming across on the screen a little bit too much like a pattern, and they're not really blending in. Vertical would not be good whatsoever, but I go to soft scan lines, now they're blending into the image, gives the image a little bit of a softness that does help it in certain spots, and that is why scan lines are so impressive. There's filters that do a lot of different things, but scan lines being on, I know a lot of people like them, and that's why I wanted to talk about them here, specifically in Neo Geo, because most people's memory of this system is playing it in arcades on a CRT monitor. But if we pop into video processing again, just because you turn a filter on doesn't mean there aren't other things you can do with it. You can see here we can change the sharpness of the actual scan lines all the way in this text file. You can go from like 10 all the way down to something in like the 75-80 range. And then from there you can also play around with gamma correction, and you can put a scan filter on top of that. This is the great thing about a lot of these filters. They give you granular control over what you want to do. Obviously gamma 200 is way too dark, but if we go to 110, that is a good looking image, even though the scan lines are a little bit thicker than they were in the soft example. That shadow in the background blends in nicely, and it does just look like a great Neo Geo image. So do be aware that when you put a filter on, you still have options within that filter you can articulate. Now when it comes to 3D stuff, as I said earlier in the video, I have a very 50-50 hit or miss love or hate relationship with filters. This is Strider 2 on the PlayStation Core, and I think this looks absolutely outstanding with nothing on top of it whatsoever. And generally when I play games on the PlayStation Core, I do not touch the filters whatsoever, because if we put scan lines on top, there's just something about the combination of 2D sprites and 3D elements. It does not look that good to my eye here. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think, and tell me what filters you love to use. But in some instances, these filters can improve areas in the screen in 3D, and if it looks good to you, then that is totally fine. Let's move a little bit further into the game and watch this sunset on the left hand side of the screen. With now an aperture grill for the Sony VGA monitor on it, you can see that sun has a little bit of softness to it, and that image, the oranges to the white in the middle of the sun, will look quite nice. Now if we lift the filter off completely, watch that same sun and sky again, they get a little bit brighter and a little bit grainier, and that's the thing about filters, especially in 3D games with 2D elements. It seems like some areas might look better and some might look worse. So you decide whatever it is you like, because don't forget, all filters are here to do is create a vibe. They change the look of an image. The same way as a filmmaker, when I grab my camera, I may do one thing on one shoot and something completely different on the other, because I am matching the look to the intent. Something like Game Boy Advance here, if we go into the core specific options, we have a Game Boy Advance filter, and it's definitely going to bring the brightness down and put that overlay over the top. Now I prefer this on Game Boy Advance games, especially if I'm playing on my 4K Samsung in the living room. That is a very bright television, and having the brightness in the core kind of washes the image out ever so slightly. So this is an instance in which I think the filtration actually brings down some of the saturation in the whites and also gives you a better vibe. Look at these clouds here. They're dark, they're dramatic, and they look look like horror. If we go in and turn all the filters off, suddenly the drama leaves those clouds. That's what I want you to understand here. Filters are just bits of data, but they are trying to create an emotion. All you want to do is adjust these filters and play around with them until the right emotion comes across. I know that's a little bit highfalutin for a MiSTer FPGA video, but that is how I feel about these things. We're trying to create a look, feel, and vibe that makes the game look better than you remember. If we move over to Dracula X on the Super Nintendo here, those flames in the background look better with a scanline over top in my opinion. Because of the way they move with the pseudo mode 7 graphics here, it just looks nice to not get them in that raw HDMI output. I'm not saying that this looks bad whatsoever, but you can kind of see the illusion break down ever so slightly when you have all of the filters off. So let's go back in, play around with some of the presets and see what we can do here. Maybe we'll make it better, maybe we'll make it worse. You can tell me down below what you think about each individual filter. I'm just scrolling around, playing with different ones that definitely shouldn't be over the top, but that's the great thing. Put the wrong filter on and maybe it's going to look absolutely amazing. If we go into something like JVC here, you're going to see you get that texture, and it also brings down the gamma. But if we want to have it a little bit darker, a little bit brighter, we can adjust it down. At gamma 130, this is definitely too dark, but it creates an interesting emotion and a feel for Dracula X that you've probably never seen before. But we can play around even more. Take a look at the flames, look at that brick masonry wall right there, and get an idea in your head of what you think it looks like and what it makes you feel. As we jump down here, we're going to play around with the filters again to see if maybe we can get a completely different feel going on. You'll see here through the load presets, one of the ones I use the most often is going to be VGA monitor. It puts a nice texture over the image. The colors are ever so slightly warmer to my eye because of that texture. I think VGA monitor here in Dracula X is the way to play. It both keeps the illusion of those flames going and just looks great. But that's the thing about these filters. There are so many of them in these stock preset lists. You can play around with them to your heart's content, you can change around what the filter does, and you can stop articulating them when you have an image you like for a particular game, because that's the interesting thing about MiSTer FPGA. The core accuracy, all the FPGA bits, that is hard science. The look and feel is a complete art. The same way that I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when you watch my videos when I'm on the table here, I have a certain color space set on my Sony FX3 and FX6 that's much warmer than my actual room. That's supposed to make you feel warm and invited into my space and make you feel like it's a good place to be. That's just how these things work, and that's what I've dedicated the last 20 years of my career to doing. Using color and using look to articulate a feeling, and that's what video filters do too. So if you haven't played around with them yet, definitely check them out. If you have any questions, leave them down below, and tell me what your favorite filter to use is if you use them. Sure that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.